but I do divorce in terms of my job, and I would very much like to help any one of your members that you think would potentially benefit from speaking to me. And my speciality is financial matters, so relating to divorce, but also the new area of law that's becoming a lot more common, which is cohabitational breakdown. I know for us, we tend to get married, Asian people, but it is becoming far more and more common that people live together and the relationship breaks down. And that, Aruna, is far more complicated than a divorce. So anything that anyone feels answered, I'm happy to answer it to your members.
Yes. Well, we could have a separate session on that, couldn't we? Perhaps, and so you can talk to our members about that.
Absolutely.
Sorry. Did you want to give more about what you do in your personal journey as well? You're going to cover. Tell us a bit more.
It's been very, very difficult, because I think that from a cultural perspective, we are very much supposed to remain married. Certainly that is the way that my family looked at it. And to try to take that step of actually saying, you know, I'm going to be a better person and a better parent for being on my own. And, you know, my mother, for example, it's very much, well, you'll never be able to do it by yourself. And regardless of the faults of the other party, or even what I did wrong, you know, you're very much meant to stay together. And Aruna, for a while I did, because culture dictates that you do. And then it got to a point, which is why I think your group is so fantastic, that I started to think I didn't want my children to see the behaviors that were going on in my marriage and think that they were normal. And I think, I know it might sound a little bit defeatist, but if it was just myself and my husband, I think quite possibly we might have stayed together. But when you look at the enormity of the responsibility of kids and what they learn and what they see, and it's so sad, because still I think a lot of the people in our culture, certainly amongst the Muslim circles, you know, there is that sort of emphasis on, you know, it's the far better thing for the child to remain married. But I don't think that's right. You know, I really think that if we can manage our mental health, if we can do, as Hamza was saying, work, and, you know, also have some sort of balance. That's the hard bit, I think, for all of us. It's the balance. Certainly with my job, it never actually ends. You don't sort of clock off at 5:30. And, you know, but I help a lot of our people. There are complexities when Jewish and Muslim women want to get divorced, because there is a religious perspective as well. And what I find amongst the Indian, particularly Gujarati circles, is that there's a lot of mixed money. And, you know, perhaps we live with our in-laws, or the brothers combine their incomes and have bought a house. So like you said, we can talk about all that another time. But the reason why I wanted to be involved is to say that what I think you're doing is great. You didn't exist 15 years ago when I became a single parent. And anything that you and I can do to help the journey, I would like to do that.
Great. Thank you. And it's really good that you can join us today. So thank you for making time for us, really.
Thank you. So. I'll mute myself. So
okay.
I don't...
Right. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today for Mental Health Awareness Week, to talk about divorce, single parenting and mental health. I set up ASP 10 years ago now for this very reason, so people could talk to each other in the same boat, because when I went through it, as Camilla said, there wasn't stuff like this around at that time. So it's really important, in my experience, to speak to others who are going through it. Because when I went through it the first time, I was thrown out for dowry at the age of 21. I was very young. I didn't really have anybody to talk to. and it affected me long term because I bottled things up. I sort of threw myself into work and didn't really talk about it, but I know that affected me long term because up until 2-3 years ago, it still affected me. So for that reason, I think it's so important to talk to others. And this week's topic is specific to nature as well. So 3 weeks ago, we started hiking. So members could talk and hike as well at the same time, get their exercise in. So we're going to hopefully do more of that in the future. Sorry, I'm just admitting somebody else. So yes, so that's what we're looking to do. So I'm going to quickly introduce everybody who's going to be talking on the panel. We've got Saroj talking about gaslighting, Vikas talking about single dads, and Hina is going to be talking about teenage mental health. So who's going to kick off first? I think we've got Vikas who's going to be talking first.
Yeah, I don't mind. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Yeah, thank you, Aruna, first of all, for organizing this event. I think when you announced this and asked me, I'm quite passionate about mental health and glad that you were able to organize an event where this topic can be discussed in detail and I can speak about single dads and the struggles that we have. And I mean, you were saying in your speech, Aruna, in openings, that 10 years ago, there was nothing. I think even now there is nothing much available for Asian parents to talk about. So thank you, first of all, for creating a forum like this. Going back to my own journey, I got married in 2007 in India, and I've been living in London now for 17, 18 years. And unfortunately, our marriage broke down, and I wanted to have it as amicable outcome as possible. And I tried my level best because I've got a daughter. She's now 9 years old. And when I proposed that I wanted to have an amicable outcome and that our daughter has both the father and mother in her lives, I was just told that I was dreaming that in this country, it's dads only get every other weekend and half of holidays. This is what I was told. And actually, when I went and asked a lot of other organizations and knocked several doors, unfortunately, that was the answer I was given. I'm glad I didn't take that quite seriously and worked very hard. And over a period of 2-3 years of court journey, finally now my daughter has equal time with both parents, and she's I mean, I think she's responded to it very well. The 50-50 has been going on for almost 2 years now, and she's going back and forth between two homes, and she's extremely delighted. And I'm glad that I had the courage at that time to fight for it. And to be honest, I had a solicitor initially, but I couldn't. I saw that was going a bit counterproductive, so I just decided to take matters in my hand. And since then, I've been living in person, and I'm glad that on my own, knowing nothing about the system, I managed to achieve this. Going back to the topic of mental health, I think as you all probably have faced similar circumstances as it is in our Asian families, the topic of divorce is considered to be a taboo. There is a lot of shame. I went through a lot of shame. None of my mom's or dad's extended families from far I knew were ever divorced. So I was completely in a new territory and in a different country and trying to chase something that I was told that it's impossible. So how I dealt, I'll talk a bit about, struggles, what single dads go through, and a bit of it I've already touched on. I was working, I have a hospitality background, so I used to work in a 5-star hotel, leading a team of 20, running operations, so extremely busy and taxing job. And apart from that, all this was going on. And because of the shame I was going through, I was not able to talk about this with our colleagues. And I mean, only my manager knew, because I thought it was very important for him to know that what was going on at home. And I was in the family home where, a lot of friction was going on. So but apart from that, I didn't feel comfortable talking to anyone, so I think all this was getting built up, and I want to obviously, other dads that might be going through similar things, I would just share a few things which I did at that time. And I'm glad I did, because I think initially I was not willing to ask for help or call anyone for help, but later on I realized that if I keep all of this within myself, it's going to burn me out. And so finally I did a few things. Number one, I used to call Samaritans. I'm sure a lot of you would have heard about it. Whenever I had sleepless nights and a lot of difficult times, I would just pick up the phone and speak to them, and thankfully they were quite nice. They would not give you any advice, but at least there is a listening ear on the other side who are there to listen for you. And once I spoke to them, I felt very light after having spoken to them. Secondly, I considered counseling, and actually counseling was as a fallout of a course I did. Some of you might have heard about it. It's called Restored Lives. It's run by a church in central London, and I'm glad I just stumbled upon it and I just embraced it, because I didn't know at that time what else. I'm from an Indian Hindu background, and as I said, divorce is rarely spoken about, and I came across this organization which actually has a course which you can go through and learn how to come out of this crisis in your life in a as positive way as possible. And I'm glad I did that course, because as an outcome of that was the counseling I did, which I went on for 8 months. And I think that these few things that I did in my journey really helped me. And the only message I want to end my talk about is that as men, we often find very difficult to ask for help. And I think with increased awareness of mental health, I think the more and more we men try to understand that, this is, whenever we are struggling, it's okay to ask for help, okay to pick up the phone and call, whether it's your friend. I mean, unfortunately, I didn't have very close friends who I could speak to, but if you did have any friends, any family, and my siblings were of great strength to me as well. Initially, I was very hesitant to share stuff with them as well, but they came on board and supported me. So I think just my single message is just reach out for help. And obviously, rather than going into the direction of drugs and alcohol, I think there are a lot of other options nowadays with the increased awareness of mental health that we can turn to. And I'm glad I did that, and I am where I am right now. So yeah, that's how I would like to end with. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikas. Does anybody want to add anything at all at that point?
Bruna, can I just add one thing?
Yes.
I just wanted to say what Vikas has said is absolutely fundamentally important for fathers. I think that whole approach in the courts with regards to the alternate weekends and half of holidays is slowly going. That is the default position. So unfortunately, it tends to be with some mothers that you see through the courts that because the relationship has broken down, they want to limit contact with the father. And it does tend to be that default position, which Vikas, I don't know if you were involved with CAFCAS at all, but that's their default recommendation as well, even if the father has been the primary carer. But by challenging those sort of ingrained ideas of how involved a dad should be, the judges are slowly catching up and starting to recognize that the role of a father is equally important to that of a mother. And and of course for the child to see that their dad is seen as important as their mum, I think it also sends the right message. But there is still a lot to do, because the default position is what Vikas said, which is the alternate weekend. But Aruna, that's I just wanted to say, I think, of course, for Vikas's 9-year-old, it's a fantastic outcome. But the sort of views are slowly changing, which is really good.
Can I come in there for a second, Aruna?
Sure.
I'm really glad, Vikas, that you got the outcome that you wanted. And I agree with Camilla as well, that times are changing and the legislation is changing, and judges are much more sympathetic to the contact arrangements. But unfortunately for me, 12 years ago, that was not the case. I mean, despite me being the primary carer when we were married, and it was still, like Camilla said, the default position is that the mother should primarily get primary parent status. And then I'd have to fight to reclaim some of that if I wanted contact to be any more than would have been necessary. I mean, in the end, I did manage to get 40% on the contact order, which was quite significant for that time. But again, it's really down to the mother to try to encourage and facilitate that contact. And if that willingness isn't there, then really the court order is just a barrier. I mean, you can take the other party to court, but it's a lengthy process and no one really benefits from it. It just creates more animosity between the two. And initially I did have my boys for midweek, and then the alternate week would be a long weekend. And slowly it became very, very impractical to carry on with that arrangement, because it's like duplicating everything they've got. Uniforms, work, they'd forget things in one house and the other. So there's a lot of organization involved. And at the time, I didn't really understand that. I couldn't understand why my ex-wife was making it difficult for me to see them as often as I should have done. But I now later on appreciated that it was just convenient for the children as well. I mean, children need certainty, they need order, and they need consistency in their lives. And that's how they will flourish. Having two households and not really feeling entirely settled in any one, for me anyway, it was detrimental for them. And slowly I agreed to just back off from insisting on having them. And to the point where I just maintained phone contact and had them just when they wanted to come. And that arrangement has persisted over the last couple of years. And I find that my kids are less stressed. They're less pressurized. They feel more comfortable talking to me. We have quite a close friendship relationship now. Whereas I think if I had insisted or struggled through the courts to maintain contact, then that situation would have deteriorated. And I do think that in my case, it was better for me to just back down and compromise and not try to, in effect, it was me being selfish. I wanted to see them. And really, it was all about, or should have been all about, seeing that the children are comfortable and flourishing and growing. Now, the situation has changed, and I think I'm glad to see, Vikas, that you are managing to juggle that. Unfortunately, I couldn't. It was a difficult situation for me. But co-parenting is an ideal which we should all aspire to. But unfortunately, the nature of divorce, the way it is, does create that antagonistic, confrontational situation which shouldn't exist. And I think the changes will come. We need to adopt a more 50-50 approach right from the beginning. And like Camilla has highlighted, that is not the position we're in at the moment. The default situation is that more rights will be awarded to the mother as a matter of course, and not start from an equal standing or footing. So, but that was 12 years ago, and I'm glad to hear that today things are a lot different. That's all.
Okay, thank you. I have to move on to our next speaker so we can fit everybody in. And welcome, Saroj. Are you happy to go next?
Yeah, I'm fine. Hello, everyone. Just want to say thank you, Aruna, to have me on this platform. It's just sharing all of our experiences, obviously we're helping each other out and others as well. So today I'm talking about gaslighting in relationship. Before about gaslighting, I don't know for some of you, I never knew what gaslighting was, but I was going through it, and just going to explain what I've actually experienced it through. So gaslighting is like when one person sort of like completely controls you. It could be either of your partner, from your partner, it could be either the husband or it could be the wife, controlling the relationship. So in my case, I mean, obviously, I'm talking from experience with my ex-husband. We were in a love marriage. It was a love marriage. It lasted for 17 years. But throughout this love marriage, I actually suffered through physical abuse, verbally abuse, and I'm going to put down emotionally abuse, which I'm going to be talking about as gaslighting is emotionally abuse. So throughout my experience of this gaslighting, this abuse became so toxic that I didn't realize how bad it was. And throughout this, I mean, obviously there must have been like a warning sign, but you know, like there signs that they were out there. But when you're actually in that mind, in that situation, you don't think exactly. So, you know, your mind is sort of like, you know, I could say my ex-husband was just challenging me. So it was more of like, you know, like you could say, it challenges you like for yourself, your thoughts, your feelings, your mind. It's like it was overtaking. So, I mean, I've got to like, well, I've Googled some few things. Obviously, it came up like, you know, whatever, like what you saw, you didn't see. What you experienced, you didn't experience. What you felt, you didn't feel. Now, when I said those little quotes, it's because he made me, he did things to me that he made me feel like, you know, I was forgetful, or I was failure or useless. So like, for example, he used to move things in an object in the household, and then he used to accuse me of saying that, you know, why did you move it somewhere else? Now we cannot find it. So he was playing all these mind games. Same time, he was also doing, you know, a lot of lies, making up stories. Like, for example, gas cookers. Basically, he was accused me saying that actually has a gas cooker on. And I used to think to myself, no, I haven't. I know I've actually switched it off. And, you know, he used to sort of put it down in words like, you know, no, you've actually left it on and I had to go and turn it off and things like that. So it was more of like questioning my thoughts. To me, it felt like, you know, it was getting out of control. I mean, even though I'm explaining it to you here, it might not seem so much, but throughout the 17 years, this is how he's actually emotionally abused me. And mentally, I was sort of like really confused. I was feeling, it came to a stage that I was sort of like suffocating exactly how, you know, I was like unable to breathe, you could say. Sometimes I was standing in front of the mirror, question my own feelings, you know, sure thoughts, you know, it just left you a scar, and you just felt like, you know, maybe he's, you know, he's right. And then I started, you know, sort of agreeing, thinking, yeah, he is right, and I was wrong throughout the whole thing. So you lose confidence in yourself. That's what it was. Slowly, he started playing mind games with my children, faulting me in everything what I do, saying, you know, your mom's in the wrong, and putting me down in front of them. And obviously, this is my teenager children I'm talking about. And, you know, you could see that, you know, I was sort of, you know, feeling very like, you know, I was failing in everything. So I sort of started breaking down. I started feeling suicidal, as well as, you know, just feeling this feeling of suicidal, and, you know, thinking, you know, what's the point of me living? Because obviously I'm feeling I'm a failure. So until my son, you know, obviously, you know, who finished his GCSEs, and he sort of said to me, Mum, you know what? I really feel that we're actually in a toxic relationship. It took my son to make me realize that, you know, my marriage had actually failed a long time ago, and I was just being, you know, just staying in this toxic relationship. So he used to say to me, he goes, Mom, really need to get out and things like that. I've ended my marriage, and then, you know, I thought to myself, oh my God, how am I going to survive? You know, I've got, you know, 2 kids here. How am I going to, you know, obviously financially wise, it was quite difficult for me. I knew that for benefit of my children and myself, that we needed to seek help, because we weren't in our mind at all. So I went to the doctors, and, you know, obviously he referred me to counselling. So he said, why don't you do it as a family counselling? So I asked my son, I said, you know, come along with us. And he kept on saying, no, you know, I'm okay, I'm fine. But, you know, he refused to come counselling, whereas me and my daughter used to go counselling, and we used to understand what, you know, just to get out of that phrase of, you know, being gaslighted. But slowly, my son, he was feeling depressed. But yeah, I didn't notice that as such, like, meaning, because obviously he was doing his A-level, he kept saying to me that, you know, Mum, I'm fine and everything. So yeah, so he sort of, you know, he hid things from me, and then slowly, obviously going into depression. I think most of you know that, you know, obviously I lost my son through depression. He gave up his life, and you know, it's hit us really hard, because the thing is that, you know, I look back sometimes and I think to myself, you know, I wish, you know, I reached out to someone during my marriage time. You know, I wish I reached out to somebody, explained that we were in a toxic relationship, because it did really affect my son so much. It affected me and my daughter. So, you know, there are places that you can sort of reach out to, like family members, your own family members, you know, go and talk to them, or maybe friends, or, you know, reach out to doctors. I didn't know at that time, because my mind was already toxic with my ex-husband, what he was doing to me. It was just something that I wish I knew, and that I could access the situation and probably, you know, confirm something that, you know, that is not right in this relationship. So sometimes I think, you know, why did this gaslighting happen? Like I said, I didn't know it existed, but my ex used this abuse just for power, control, and, you know, I think he probably just found pleasure in controlling. That's what it was. So, I mean, it's quite difficult, because even though I say no one should actually go through this, and some people might have gone through it, you know, through their marriage, but they don't realize exactly this gaslighting. It is a quite very emotional situation that can actually play up your mind. So it's just that I just want to end by just saying, I mean, obviously me and my daughter have been affected so much. You know, we've gone through a trauma, you know, losing my son. It's been difficult. We, you know, we face mental health every day, but, you know, we look for things that's very positive. We look for things to be strong for each other. And I just want to end, you know, by saying that, you know, we should sort of, you know, recognize gaslighting in relationship, because it has, personally, it's affected me, and I'm sure there are other people who've been affected. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd never come across it. Move on to Hina.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Aruna, for
Okay.
inviting me to speak today. I'm going to start with a story around when me and my husband split up. My daughter was in reception when we split up, and I remember going to a wedding, and she announced in the bridal dressing room, "My mummy and daddy are splitting up, and we're not going to live together anymore." All eyes turned to me, and I was consumed with the sight of my tiny daughter and her simple statement. My lovely sister-in-law beautifully affirmed her statement and turned the conversation back to the excitement of her own wedding day. I felt sad for her that I could not give her the complete family that she deserved. I reflected on what her life would look like. I loved her dearly, and I knew if I was happy, our whole lives together would be full of joy, fun, and laughter. I also knew her dad and his family loved her to bits. They hung on her every word, indulged, pampered, and listened to her. I convinced myself she would have the best of both worlds, and for at least 6 years she did. She was massively loved and adored, and she thrived. But her struggles began in year 6, and I later learned that is when she first felt unloved and insecure. At some point, and this became the source of her depression, anxiety, insomnia, and poor appetite. But she was silent. She put on a brave face and appeared to be a happy, confident young girl, like she'd always been. She went to secondary school, and she would stay with me one week and with her dad one week. And at weekends, she would stay with her grandparents. It was not a living arrangement that I would ever aspire to, but if she was happy, then I could be with it. Then one day she told me she needed help and she was depressed. We made an appointment to see the doctor, and they referred us to a voluntary funded counselling service. And it took over 6 months from their initial assessment to have an allocated counsellor working with us, or working with her. She could not speak to me or her father about what was discussed in those sessions. And we were separately accessing parent counselling to reflect on how her mental health and sleep hygiene could be improved. But we were in the dark as to the possible causes. Finally, after 18 months, we had a meeting together with her counsellor and the parent counsellor, but my daughter didn't want to be there. And my ex felt the three of us, the two counsellors and I, were going to prevent him from looking after his daughter. And I didn't know where this had come from. He was angry, defensive. He was saying he'd fight me in court. And I was so dumbfounded. And I was just like, what's actually happening here? And it occurred to me that this really wasn't about him and what he wanted. I called Women's Trust and they signposted me to legal advice. And I drafted an affidavit detailing all the circumstances to date. I spoke with my daughter and explained having a main residence would improve her sleep hygiene and overall mental health, and it would impact it positively. She and I discussed how best to tell her dad, and we spoke to members of our extended families to help with this, and they did. The affidavit was never needed after all. But then the paternal family, well, they loved her and missed her, right? So they felt rejected and outcast, and so did her dad. And she felt guilt and responsibility. She felt that guilt and responsibility for their pain. And her mental health deteriorated. Cam's early years and the school then formed a plan with us to get us into an emotionally stronger position. And this was our real turning point. And our early years worker, she was like an angel who entered our lives and showed us a way out of the pain. I worked on myself while my daughter worked on herself, and we leaned on each other. There was nothing we could not count on with each other. And we became resilient, we didn't waver. The choice had been made, and whilst it caused others pain, it was not the intention. The priority for me will always be my daughter. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was very emotional. Did anybody want to ask anything at all or comment?
I just want to say, that was very emotional because, I mean, I'm sure everyone is probably affected with their children, that what they go through mental health is just, sometimes children cannot even speak about it. It's difficult for them to open up, and yet they can stay quiet and, probably don't want to worry the parents, even though they're going through so much. So it's like they try to sort of just keep quiet. And just trying to see if they can resolve the problems themselves, and then sometimes it happens, their education gets affected, friend circle gets affected, family life gets affected, and it sometimes, for them it gets too much, they cannot even handle. Seeking out counseling, it's like they feel a bit embarrassed or a bit ashamed. I wouldn't say as much, but I mean, obviously some children doesn't like to go out and speak out. They might just think, I don't want to be sort of like, their friends thinking, look, oh, she has to go off early because she's going to counselling, or she needs, because sometimes they have counselling sessions in schools as well. So, they somehow the friends might even find out, so that they get scared. They don't want to sort of, feel like, oh, I don't want to go for counselling. I don't want to seek help. So it's quite difficult, and you're, I do understand what your daughter's gone through.
Thank you, Suraj. And Nalini too. I mean, your shares were absolutely beautiful. Thanks so much for sharing. And I'm sure it would have helped very many people.